always arrives like a door that opens by itself. I don't turn the handle. It yields to a breath, a draft, a pressure that isn't air. And every year when it swings inward, I tell myself I won't cross. I've promised friends, lovers, even the priest who once let me sit in the back pew long after everyone had left, that I'm done with it. But promises have no weight at all when the dark remembers your name. Some nights, tonight, I close my eyes and the first thing I feel is not sleep, but temperature. The world turns a degree colder, the sound thins until it's threadbare, and the dark knits itself tight around me, a blindfold I somehow recognize by touch. I can smell damp stone, old iron, the faint bitterness of spent incense. And there it is again, the shape in the road where there should be nothing, where there was once nothing, where nothing refuses to remain. People think memory is light, that when you recall a thing, you bring it up into brightness. It isn't like that for me. Memory is a room without windows, a well with steps spiraling down and down. You don't bring the thing up, you go down where it lives. I learned that young in places where the hills hold their breath and the streets climb like veins into the sky. I grew up among those stairs where every step keeps count of your sins and your laughter. The same way stray dogs remember who kicks and who shares a tortilla. We knew the drunks by their first names and the mad by their kindness. We knew the feel of the rail under a sweaty palm at 4 in the morning when the town is nothing but silence and unlit windows. We knew without learning the way shadows lean toward you when you pass them like reeds in a current. I shouldn't have told any of these stories. That is the other promise I made, the one I broke first. The old women say that to tell a thing is to feed it. 2 syllables is a crumb, a paragraph is a crust, a night of telling is a banquet laid with salt and bone. They say there are months that eat more than others. Remember that, they whisper, when the saints are carried down the street and the firecrackers fall silent in the alleys, when the candles are stubby and greasy on your grandmother's table. Remember that October has a throat and teeth. I laughed the first time I heard it. I don't laugh now. The door is open and the tongue of the dark flicks the threshold, tasting. Maybe you think I'm being poetic to hide the dullness of what really happened. I wish it were that simple. I wish these were the flourishes of a bored mouth. But I have the body memory of it. The ache along the back of my neck like a bruise that never quite shows. The tremor in my left hand when I pass a stairwell at dawn. The way my jaw goes tight at the first hint of damp on concrete. The dark is not metaphoric to me. It has temperature and texture. It has a weight you learn without wanting to, the way you learn the heft of grief or of a pistol you vowed you would never hold. When I was a kid, I used to climb the hill behind our houses just to look down at the city when the power cut out. It went black in waves, as if the night were closing a fist. From up there, the silence was not absence. It was pressure. You could feel the dogs hush. You could feel the heat of asphalt surrender. Sometimes a figure would move along the road that ribboned the slope, a thin thread of darker dark that kept its shape longer than it should have. I told myself it was a trick of the eye. But at that age, I was already learning that eyes are the first conspirators. They serve whatever keeps you living. They will give you mercy or lie for you or not show you a thing until it is too close to avoid. I remember the first time the shape in the road turned into a person. It was late, and my breath tasted like metal from running, and there was the sweet sourness of cheap spirits on the breath of the streets. I hadn't drunk, but the alleys had, the men had, the stair rails had. The shape wasn't moving. That was what made it worse. Stillness after motion is a halting, but stillness that never started is a law. I felt the law written against my skin. I thought of names, Johnny, Brandon, the boys who never stopped climbing, the ones we called crazy with the strange tenderness people reserve for the damned they're related to. I thought of the women we called witches, the ones with hands like birds and voices that could carry through dawn like the thin metal of a flute. I told myself stories to set bones back into place. That's what stories can do too when they're small and told only to yourself. They can be splints. But even a splint is made of wood, and wood remembers trees, and trees remember wind. The memory ran through me like a shiver and made my knees light. If you need a reason for why I keep talking, it's this. Silence hasn't helped. Silence didn't keep anyone safe. Silence didn't bring back what went missing or dry what stayed wet when it should have been dry. Sometimes the only thing we're allowed is to lay the table as carefully as we can, to set down the knives point inward, to place the salt where it cannot be spilled, to say the names of those we loved and could not keep. And sometimes, if you're lucky, telling the thing pins it to the page the way pinned butterflies are gentled by glass. It can't reach you through the cool. Sometimes the glass breaks. But I have no other language than this. So listen. This is how the door opens. First, there is the fatigue of a day you think you've survived. There is the tinny noise of a nearby television, the way every city repeats itself in other cities when the hour gets thin. There is a baby fussing or not fussing at all, and that is worse when it's worse. There is the smell of shampoo lingering on a towel, the way chlorine on cotton holds its own kind of ghost. There is a road that should be empty and isn't. A ranch that can lock its gates and still feel the night reach inside. There is iron under your tongue when you have not bled. There is a figure doing something no body should do by the curb of a forgotten canal, and there is the knowledge as cold as a coin in the mouth that grief can borrow your voice and whisper to you in a woman's tone, "Come, come." I am not an investigator, I am not a priest, I am not a scientist counting the seconds a clock refuses to show. I'm only the first witness you meet at the threshold. I hold the door. I tell you what the dark smells like and how it arranges its furniture and where it hides the laugh it will use later. I put a hand on your shoulder and I ask you to breathe slow. There are rules, even here. We won't say certain names out loud. We won't whistle after midnight. If you hear fingernails on the window, we won't answer right away, not even once, not even to prove we're brave. We'll sit with the dogs when their voices turn low and angry, and we'll watch the curtains without pulling them. We'll keep our salt close. We'll keep our lights honest. When we have to climb, we'll climb together. The door is open now. You can feel it, can't you? The chill has found your wrists. The silence has taken the corners of your room and tucked them under. I can't promise anything except that I will tell it as it happened. And when I don't know, I will let the not knowing stand. Some stories bite when you try to make them gentle. Some stories want your throat. This isn't mercy, this isn't cruelty, this is October, and we are on the road again. If you see a figure up ahead, don't call to it. If it smiles, don't smile back. If it keeps still, that will be worse. Come close, let me begin. My name is Chue, and what I'm about to tell you happened years ago back in Ecatepec, the neighborhood where I was born and raised. People who know those hills understand what I mean when I say they're their own world. Streets that crawl up the slope like veins, staircases that never end, and neighbors who know too much and too little at once. Outsiders don't come there unless they have a reason. Everyone else belongs by blood, by gossip, or by debt. From the time I was a kid, I learned how to get along with all kinds of people. Workers, drunkards, the ones we called Los Loquitos. We didn't mean it cruelly. It was the kind of nickname that came with a smile, the sort of familiarity that pretends to hide pity. They were the men who once had houses, families, jobs, and who, through bad luck or worse choices, ended up living in the streets. They slept behind the church, under the stairs, or beside the little store where the owner turned a blind eye if you didn't cause trouble. There was one in particular, Johnny. Johnny Oregon, that's what we called him. He'd bragged that he'd worked in Oregon in the US, picking fruit. 6 months later, they deported him. By then, he'd lost everything. The money he'd saved across the border, the roof over his head, and his wife. She'd taken another man before he even came back. The money he sent for rent was spent by someone else. When he returned, his house was gone, his family gone, and all he had left were calloused hands and a bottle of Tonayan, cheap aguardiente that burns like regret. We all knew Johnny. He'd nod at us on the way up the stairs, humming songs nobody else remembered. He wasn't dangerous, not even when drunk. He just talked to himself in 2 languages, mixing them in strange ways, as if he were translating the ghosts of his own past. That night, Brandon and I were coming back from a party in another colonia. It was almost 4 in the morning. We'd had some beers, nothing serious. Brandon lived halfway up the hill where cars couldn't climb, so we had to take the long staircase that cut through the rocks. You don't get scared of thieves up there because we all know each other. Fear comes from other things, the kind that doesn't need pockets or knives. Halfway up, where the streetlights end and the dark thickens into something you can feel on your skin, we saw him. Johnny. He was standing still on one of the steps right in the center of the stairs. His silhouette was unmistakable. Thin, long coat, that same hat he'd always worn. But something was wrong. He wasn't standing flat. He was on his toes, as if he were trying to reach for something above him, his back arched, his arms slightly spread. "Johnny!" Brandon called out, half laughing. "Oi, Johnny, que haces?" No answer. Then he started to shake. At first it looked like he was laughing, his shoulders twitching. But the movement grew sharper, too fast, too violent. His arms jerked upward as though an invisible current were running through him. We froze. I felt the blood drain from my face. Brandon grabbed my arm. "Bro, he's having a seizure or something," he said. We ran toward him, the steps echoing under our shoes. And then I saw it. I swear to God, I saw it. There was someone behind him, not standing behind him, holding him. It was a woman. At least I thought it was. She was tall, taller than any woman I've ever seen. Her body thin, her dress black and long, like an old wedding gown. But her face was not young. It looked like it belonged to someone 100 years old. Skin like parchment, eyes sunk deep, lips cracked but curved into a smile that didn't move with the rest of her face. She had both arms wrapped around Johnny's chest, holding him upright, her fingers locked against his ribs. The sound she made wasn't laughter exactly. It was a kind of dry chuckle, the rattle of breath through dust. Then she leaned forward, still smiling, and bit him, right at the base of his neck. Not like a kiss, not like a vampire in the movies. It was animal, desperate, wet. Johnny's head jerked back, and that sound, God, that sound wasn't human. We didn't think, we just ran. Brandon tripped on one of the steps, scraping his knee, but he didn't stop. I heard him praying in broken Spanish, words that didn't make sense. I felt something behind us, not footsteps, just the weight of attention, like the air bending toward us. When we reached the bottom of the hill, gasping, we ran into a group of Brandon's friends hanging around the corner store. They laughed when we told them. "You too drunk, man, go home," they said. But one of them, an older guy named Rafa, frowned and said, "Let's go check. Maybe Johnny's in trouble." They went up. We stayed behind, shaking, trying to convince ourselves it had been a trick of the shadows, some hallucination of exhaustion and alcohol. But the group never found him. No Johnny, no woman, nothing. Except for a stain on the steps where we'd seen them. It wasn't blood, it was darker, thick like grease, and when they tried to scrub it, it smeared instead of disappearing. They said it smelled faintly of copper and wet soil. The next morning, everyone was talking about it. No one had seen Johnny since. His usual spots, under the bridge beside the store near the chapel, were empty. He was gone, and the stain remained. They said it never dried. Even when it rained, even when the sun hit the stairs directly, it stayed damp, sticky, shining in the dark like oil. I didn't believe in witches then. I do now. Because people from other barrios came asking. They said they'd seen something similar before, a tall woman with a young body and an old face laughing in the dark, feeding on men who slept in the street. They called her La Bruja de Ecatepec. Some say she drinks not blood but the breath itself, that she pulls it from the back of your neck, where the soul first enters and last leaves. Others say she's not even a woman anymore, but the shadow of one, feeding on warmth because she's forgotten what it feels like. That stain? It's still there. I've seen it with my own eyes. And every time I walk past it, I feel a pinch at the back of my neck like teeth grazing my skin. People in my neighborhood stopped using those stairs after that night. For weeks, even the stray dogs avoided that path. They would start whining halfway up, then turn back toward the street, tails between their legs. Kids took longer routes to school, even if it meant adding 20 minutes to their walk. The stain stayed there, broad, dark, almost alive. At first it was the talk of the barrio. Everyone had a theory. Some said it was oil from a broken pipe, others that someone had spilled old motor grease. But those of us who'd seen Johnny that night knew better. Brandon tried to convince himself it wasn't real. He said we'd been drunk, that maybe it was shadows or fog. I didn't argue. I just kept quiet. But inside me, something had shifted. Every night since then, I've dreamed of that bite, her teeth sinking into the soft flesh of Johnny's neck. In my dreams, the sound repeats like chewing dry leaves. I wake up with my jaw clenched, tasting rust. A week later, I couldn't stand it anymore. I went up there alone in daylight. The sun hit the steps so hard it burned through my shoes, but the stain still gleamed wet, as though it was sweating from within. When I crouched down, I felt the smell, thick, metallic, mixed with something sweet and rotten. Not like blood, not like oil either. It was like the air itself had turned rancid. An old woman from the next street climbed up behind me, carrying a bundle of herbs. Her name was Doña Mari, and everyone said she was a curandera, not a witch exactly, but someone who knew how to talk to them. She looked at the stain without surprise. "La tocaste?" she asked. I shook my head. "Bien, don't touch it. That's not dirt, mijo. That's what's left when something takes the breath out of a person." I asked her what she meant. She took out a handful of salt and threw it over the spot, whispering something under her breath. "The bruja doesn't drink blood," she said finally. "She drinks what moves inside it, the warmth, the air, the soul. When she's done, the skin collapses like paper, and this," she pointed at the dark patch, "this is what the body leaves behind when the spirit has been chewed away." I felt my stomach twist. "Johnny, did she kill him?" She gave me a look I still can't forget, half pity, half warning. "He's not dead, maybe. Some people don't die, they just leave the side we can see." That night I told Brandon what she'd said. He laughed it off, called it superstition, but I could tell he was scared too. He started sleeping with his light on. Every time we passed those stairs, he'd look down instead of up, as if afraid the hill would look back. A month later, the stories began to spread. Someone from another colonia swore they'd seen a tall woman at the bus stop, her dress dragging through the puddles, though it hadn't rained in days. Another said they'd heard laughter coming from the ravine behind the old chapel. Always laughter, always at night, always near men walking alone. People began to whisper her name again, La Bruja de Ecatepec. In some versions, she was once a woman betrayed by her husband, in others a nun who had broken her vows and been cursed to wander forever between life and death. But the oldest version, the one Doña Mari told me, came from before the church bells ever reached our hills. Back then, the Nahua people spoke of a creature called the Tlahuelpuchi, a shape-shifting being that fed on human life. It could become a cat, a ball of fire, or a woman who aged backward, her face ancient while her body stayed young. They said she carried the scent of burned copal and that wherever she drank, the earth itself absorbed what was left, leaving behind a black mark that never dried. That's what we had on our stairs, a mouth of the earth always open. One night, Brandon dared me to go with him and pour holy water over it. We went up there together, armed with a bottle we'd stolen from the church. When the first drops hit the stain, they didn't spread, they hissed. The sound was faint but real, like drops of water hitting hot metal. The smell that rose made both of us gag. I could swear I heard something underneath the steps, like a breath drawn in slow and deep. We ran. Neither of us spoke about it again. A few weeks later, Brandon moved to another neighborhood with his aunt. He said it was just to get closer to his job, but I knew better. I stayed. Sometimes I thought I saw movement near the top of the stairs, a shadow that didn't belong to anyone. Other nights, I'd wake up to the sound of soft laughter coming from outside my window. Dry, old, patient. I tried to ignore it, to tell myself it was just memory turning cruel. But memory doesn't smell like smoke. Memory doesn't leave footprints made of grease leading toward your door. A few months after that, I dreamed of Johnny again. He was sitting by the old store, drinking from his bottle of Tanayan, humming the same song he always used to. But when he turned to look at me, his eyes were gone. Just two dark hollows where they should have been. He smiled anyway and said, "She's not done, Chewy. She's still hungry." When I woke up, the air in my room was heavy and sweet, like the moment before rain. I didn't tell anyone, not even Doña Mari. And I haven't walked those stairs since. But sometimes when I visit Brandon's house and the night is too quiet, I still see it from afar. The black mark glistening under the streetlight like something breathing. It's smaller now, maybe. Or maybe the street is bigger. But no one touches it. No one dares. They say the Bruja moved on to other hills, other towns. But I think she's still here, resting, waiting. Because when the wind comes down from the mountains carrying the smell of damp earth and cheap liquor, it always turns toward Ecatepec first. And sometimes, if you stand on those stairs long enough, you can feel a hand brush the back of your neck, soft, dry, testing your warmth. My name is Sylvia, and though I've never been sure if what happened to me belongs to the world of the living or something else, I still wake up some nights with the same cold film over my skin. I used to think of myself as rational, maybe even skeptical. I believed in logic and coincidence and tiredness as an excuse for everything strange. That was before 2011, before a night in Cancun taught me that not all time passes forward. At that point in my life, things were simple. I had a partner, Carlos, and our 5-month-old baby. We lived in a small house, 2 floors, warm, ordinary. His parents were kind, always asking us to visit. That afternoon, Carlos came home from work and suggested we go see them. It wasn't planned, just a casual trip. The sun was still high when we left, the baby strapped into his seat, his tiny head bobbing to the rhythm of the car. When we arrived, everything was normal. His parents were getting ready to visit a relative nearby. Said they'd be gone for an hour at most. They asked us to stay and wait for them, so we did. At 6:30, they left, promising to return by 7. I remember looking at the big clock on the dining room wall, its second hand sweeping slow circles. Carlos turned on the TV, found Gladiator. I'd never seen it. We settled into the couch. I pulled the baby's carrier close to my feet. The air smelled faintly of cleaning soap and roasted coffee. That's the last clear thing I remember before everything bent. When I opened my eyes again, I was on the floor, on my side, a cushion under my head as if someone had gently laid me down. In front of me, Carlos was also lying there, his eyes half open but unfocused. The baby, still in his seat behind me, slept peacefully. For a moment, I thought we'd only dozed off. Then I looked at the clock. It was 9:30 p.m. 2 hours gone. The house was silent, darker. I felt heavy, like my body was full of sand. My mind worked slowly, words forming behind a curtain. I reached out to wake Carlos. His skin was cool, not cold, but there was something wrong in the way he blinked. Slow, automatic. We didn't talk. We just knew it was time to go home. He carried the baby. I grabbed the diaper bag. I remember walking out to the car, the warm air turning strangely moist. As we drove, I watched the lights blur outside the window. Everything looked distant, as though we were underwater. I told myself I was just tired. When we reached home, Carlos placed the baby's seat in the living room and said he'd work a bit before coming upstairs. I took the baby to his room, undressed him, gave him a quick bath. The strangest thing was that he didn't wake up, not once. Not from the water, not from my hands moving him. I'd always loved that soft, milk-sweet smell of his hair after bathing. But that night I couldn't smell anything. The world was scentless, like paper. I laid him in the crib, went to my room, sat on the bed, and saw through the window a single bright star, so big it looked close enough to touch. I must have fallen asleep that way, still dressed. When I woke again, dawn was filtering through the curtains. Carlos was next to me, sleeping deeply. For a few seconds, I thought everything had been a dream until I heard a faint dripping sound. I followed it to the baby's room. He was awake, smiling, reaching toward the mobile above his crib. But one sleeve of his little shirt was soaked, completely, as though it had been dipped into water. The rest of him was dry, the sheets untouched. I lifted him, felt the chill of the fabric against my hand. The water trickled down his arm, a thin, clear line. I carried him downstairs, still half asleep myself. When I reached for the diaper bag on the sofa, something splashed against my foot. The bag was leaking. A dark patch spread on the floor beneath it. Inside, everything was wet. The wipes, the spare clothes, but there was no bottle, no container, nothing that could have spilled. I called for Carlos, panic breaking through the haze. He came running, hair messy, eyes confused. He looked inside the bag, then at me. "Why is there water?" he asked. "I don't know," I said. "It wasn't raining. There's nothing here that could leak." He pressed his fingers to the wet lining, rubbed them together, sniffed. "It's not water," he murmured. "It smells like the sea." I hadn't noticed it before, but he was right. There was a faint briny scent like salt and algae. It clung to the baby's sleeve, too. Carlos leaned against the table, staring at the stain on the floor. Then he said something that froze the blood in my veins. "I don't remember driving home," he said. "The last thing I remember is watching the movie." I tried to laugh, but the sound came out wrong. "You were driving, Carlos. You parked the car." He shook his head slowly. "No, I don't remember any of it." We stood there, holding the baby between us, both realizing that 2 hours of our lives were missing, and whatever had replaced them had left behind only salt water. Later that morning, we called his parents. They said they'd returned at 7, just as promised, and found the house dark. They'd called our phones, but we never answered. Yet our call logs were empty, no missed calls, no signal lost, no explanation. For days afterward, the smell of salt lingered in the living room. I washed the sofa, scrubbed the floors, threw away the diaper bag. Still, when night fell, a dampness crept in from the corners, and sometimes as I drifted towards sleep, I heard the faint sound of waves, far away but unmistakable. Once, half dreaming, I thought I saw a reflection of that same bright star in the baby's crib. Except it wasn't outside the window. It was floating above him, pulsing like light underwater. I never found out what happened in those 2 missing hours. Maybe we never left that house. Maybe we crossed into another current and drifted back without noticing. But since then, every time I see water shimmer on tile or hear a tap drip in silence, I feel it calling again, patient and cold, like the tide waiting for its next offering. In the weeks that followed, I became obsessed with time. Not the kind that passes on clocks, but the kind that hides between seconds, the folds where something could slip through unnoticed. I bought a cheap wall clock and hung it beside the dining room mirror, then another one in the bedroom. Both worked fine for a while until one morning I realized the hands weren't moving. They were stuck at 9:32, the exact hour when I had woken up on that floor at my in-laws' house. Carlos told me it was a coincidence, that I was just seeing patterns because I needed them. But each clock I brought into the house eventually stopped at that same minute. Always 9:32. The first time it happened, I threw the clock away. The second, I tried to ignore it. The third, I kept it and stared at it every night until sleep came. Something about the silence of that minute began to seep into our lives. The baby would sometimes wake in the middle of the night, not crying, just looking at the ceiling as if listening. The air in the house felt heavier on certain nights, wet even when no window was open. Once, when I went to check on him, I found a thin trail of moisture running down the wall beside his crib. It smelled faintly of salt. Carlos and I stopped talking about the incident, but we both felt it. The distance between us stretching like the horizon at low tide. He avoided the living room, I avoided mirrors. When I looked into them, my reflection always seemed a fraction of a second late. Then came the night I woke up to find the star again. It was the same one I'd seen through the window that first evening, but brighter, closer. Its light filled the baby's room with a soft, pale glow. I stepped inside, afraid to breathe. He was asleep, his tiny chest rising and falling the same as always. But the light didn't come from outside. It was seeping through the walls like water filtering through limestone. When I reached for him, my hand felt colder than the air. And then I heard it. A sound that wasn't quite wind and not quite whisper. A rhythm, slow, deliberate. It reminded me of waves breaking against rock, the breath of something ancient pressing in and out. The sound came from beneath the floor. I called Carlos, but by the time he arrived, everything was normal again. The star gone, the light gone, the air dry. He said I'd been dreaming. Maybe I was, but I could still feel moisture between my toes. The next morning, when I went to make coffee, I noticed something strange. The metal sink was covered in a thin white crust like dried salt. I touched it and it crumbled between my fingers. My hands smelled like the ocean. Later, while feeding the baby, I caught sight of something in his eyes. Not fear, not pain, just reflection. The shimmer of light on water. And behind it, something that moved, slow and patient, as if watching through him. I began to think about what Doña Mari once told me years ago when she'd done a limpia for my aunt in Veracruz. El agua guarda lo que ve. Water keeps what it sees. She said rivers remember faces, that wells can echo voices long after the mouths that spoke them are gone. Maybe that night in Cancun we'd fallen into something's memory. I searched for explanations. Some article online said our symptoms matched hypnagogic paralysis or shared dissociation, that the human brain could lose hours under stress. Another one talked about missing time, about how electromagnetic fields near the ocean could disrupt brain waves. But how do you explain the salt on a baby's clothes? Or the way your body remembers sounds that your ears shouldn't have heard? One afternoon, while Carlos was at work, I went back to my in-laws' house. The big clock was still on the wall. I asked if I could look at it. My mother-in-law laughed, said it hadn't worked since last year. She hadn't bothered to fix it. I asked her the time it had stopped. She squinted, read the hands. 9:32, she said without hesitation. I felt the floor sway beneath me like the moment before a wave breaks. Before leaving, I went to the bathroom, splashed water on my face. It tasted faintly of metal, faintly of salt. I thought I saw something ripple in the mirror behind me, just for a second, a hand brushing against the glass from the other side. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay there listening to the soft ticking of our bedroom clock. At 9:31, the sound stopped. Carlos stirred beside me, mumbling something I couldn't catch. I turned toward him and saw a single drop of water slide down his temple. Another followed, and another, until his hair clung wet to his forehead. The smell of the sea filled the room thick and heavy. I shook him awake. He opened his eyes but didn't move. His pupils were wide, black, unfocused, and then in the dim light I saw the reflection of that same bright star in them. Two tiny tides trapped behind his gaze. I whispered his name. He blinked once, then twice, and the water stopped. He sat up, gasping as though surfacing from deep below. When I asked what he'd seen, he said only this: "There's a place under the water where time doesn't move." After that, I stopped checking the clocks. Some things are better left unmeasured. But sometimes when the baby's asleep and the house goes quiet, I still hear it. That slow, patient rhythm beneath the floor. It isn't the sea. It's something older, something that remembers me. My name isn't important anymore because what matters is the road and what waited there. I used to be a university student in Puebla. My best friend was from Chihuahua, and one Christmas she invited me to spend the holidays with her family. I accepted without hesitation. She was the kind of person whose calm drew you in, who spoke of her home as if it were a refuge made of wind and pine. When the plane landed, the air felt different, drier, thinner, like breathing through cloth. Her parents met us at the terminal. They were warm, quiet people, dressed neatly, carrying themselves with the patience of those who live far from cities. We drove for hours, leaving behind the lights and noise, following a road that curled like a spine through the mountains. By the time the sky went purple, we'd reached their ranch. It wasn't a house. It was an estate carved into the land. A long white fence, a row of cypress trees, horses grazing in silence. Two enormous dogs bounded toward us, white, almost luminous in the last light. They barked once, then fell still as if recognizing us. Her father warned me gently, half joking, "Here the nights are real nights. Don't go outside alone and never whistle after dark." I laughed, thinking it was a country superstition. Christmas came and went like a dream of warmth and candlelight. There were no workers on the property that week, no one but the four of us and the dogs. It was peaceful, too peaceful. By the 25th, I wanted to call my mother to tell her how beautiful everything was, but there was no signal. I walked the perimeter, climbed onto fences, lifted my phone high into the air. Nothing. Her parents lent me a truck to drive to the nearest town about 40 minutes away. The road was simple, they said. One main route, then the dirt path back to the ranch. But her father's face turned serious when he added, "Don't come back after dark. The night eats light here," I promised. In town, I made the call, bought small gifts, chatted with shopkeepers. I lost track of time. By the time I looked up, the sky was bleeding orange. I hurried to the truck, drove out, and within minutes, night fell like a trapdoor. The darkness was absolute. My headlights carved only a narrow tunnel ahead. Beyond that, the world disappeared. No stars, no moon, just a heavy blackness pressing on all sides. The road narrowed, the asphalt blending with dust. My hands ached from gripping the wheel. To stay awake, I began counting seconds between reflective markers. But there were none. Just emptiness, and in that emptiness, the thought came uninvited. What if I turned off the headlights for a moment, just to see? I don't know why I listened. Maybe curiosity, maybe defiance, maybe the same foolish courage that makes children stare into mirrors at midnight. I switched them off. The dark swallowed everything. Even my own hands vanished. The silence became a physical thing, pressing against my ears. I counted. 1, 2, and switched the lights back on. The relief was immediate. The world returned. I laughed shakily. See, nothing there. But I did it again. 2 seconds, then 3. The third time, when the lights returned, something was standing in the road ahead. At first I thought it was a scarecrow, tall, motionless, draped in black. Then I saw it shift, not stepping forward but unfurling, like fabric moving underwater. It had the outline of a woman, long and thin, but her head was wrong. Elongated, narrow, tapering to a point like a beak. The face gleamed faintly, reflecting my lights. A mask, I told myself. Some prank. Some person lost. But the way she stood, utterly still yet heavy with intent, froze me to the bone. She held a wooden staff taller than herself, carved with something that glimmered in the light. Her hands were too long, her fingers curved inward. I remember her dress clinging to the dust like smoke, moving without wind. And then she turned her head toward me. Not a human turn. Too slow, too deliberate, as if every vertebra resisted. Her eyes, or what should have been eyes, caught the light and swallowed it whole. I should have reversed, driven away. Instead, I hit the gas, steering just enough to avoid her. The tires kicked up gravel as I passed. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw her mouth open, too wide, too silent. In the rearview mirror, she began to move, step by step, toward me. I didn't look again. I drove until I saw the faint yellow lights of the ranch flicker in the distance. My hands were shaking so badly I almost missed the turn. When I reached the gate, her father was already outside, the 2 white dogs beside him. He didn't ask questions. He just closed the gate behind my truck, fastened the latch, and said, "Inside, now." Inside, they moved with practiced calm. Windows locked, curtains drawn, every door bolted. The dogs paced in front of the door, hackles raised, growling low. My friend's mother began praying under her breath. I stood there, trembling. The image of that figure burned into my eyes. After a few minutes, we heard the dogs bark, louder, angrier. Then silence, the kind that hums in your skull. Her father took a breath, whispered something I didn't catch, and turned off the lights. We sat in the dark together, listening. A soft scraping sound passed along the outside wall, slow and deliberate. Something brushed the window pane like feathers dragging across glass. Then a sound I'll never forget, a faint, distant laugh, dry, rasping like air passing through a hollow reed. The dogs whimpered. We stayed like that for what felt like hours until at last her father whispered, "She's gone." No one spoke after that. The next morning, everything looked normal. The sun was warm, the sky blue. But outside the gate, the dust on the road was marked with strange prints, bird-like but too large, each one ending in a sharp groove. I wanted to leave that same day, but her father said it was better to wait, to let the air settle. He never explained what that meant. That night, I slept with the curtains closed, the dogs lying across my door. But before dawn, I woke to a fluttering sound, soft, steady, like wings beating against wood. When I opened my eyes, I saw shadows moving behind the curtain, tall and thin, as if someone were standing just outside the window waiting for me to look. I didn't. The next morning, the house smelled of pine and burned wax. My friend's mother was already awake, sweeping the porch in silence. Her father sat at the table, coffee untouched, staring at nothing. The dogs lay in the yard, their white fur dull, their eyes half closed. They looked exhausted, as if they had spent the night fighting something we couldn't see. I asked what had happened, why they'd reacted that way, but my friend only shook her head. "You shouldn't talk about it," she said quietly. "Not here." When I pressed her, her father raised his eyes from the cup. They were pale and tired. "The mountain listens," he said, "and sometimes it answers." That was all. After breakfast, I walked outside to breathe. The air was sharp, clean, too clean, as if the night had been scrubbed away. Yet the moment I stepped past the fence, I felt it, something heavy, invisible, pressing against my chest. The world was silent, but not empty. The silence was watching. I turned toward the dirt road, and that's when I noticed the marks again. Not footprints exactly. Grooves, scratches, like the ground had been cut with a blade. They led from the gate out toward the hills. At the edge of one of those grooves, a single white feather lay half buried in dust. It was long, curved, but the tip was gray as though it had been burned. I reached to pick it up, but before my fingers touched it, one of the dogs barked sharply, startling me. The sound echoed off the mountains, then died instantly, like the air itself had swallowed it. I let the feather fall and backed away. Inside, my friend's mother was preparing a bowl of salt water mixed with herbs, ruta, basil, and rosemary. She sprinkled it at each doorway while whispering in a low, rhythmic tone. I asked what she was doing. She didn't stop moving her hand. "To keep her outside," she said, "to remind the house who it belongs to." That day, I learned the rules. Rule 1, never call her by name. There's no name that belongs to her now. The people here simply refer to her as la que vuela sin sombra, the one who flies without a shadow. Rule 2, never whistle after midnight. The sound draws her closer, makes her think you're calling. Rule 3, if the dogs change their bark, if it becomes low and uneven, turn off every light and close your eyes. Don't look at the windows, no matter what you hear. Rule 4, never ever open the door after the third knock. She knocks 3 times. The first is to ask, the second is to warn, the third is to claim. I thought these were folk stories meant to calm fear, but the way they followed each step like a ritual made me realize they weren't pretending. They were surviving. That night after sunset, we repeated the same motions. Locks, curtains, silence. Her father placed a small cross of palm leaves above the door. Her mother lit a candle and hid it inside a clay bowl. "Light must be humble," she said. "Too much of it offends her." We sat again in the dark. The dogs paced restlessly. Their nails scratched the wood floor, the sound steady, comforting. For a while, nothing happened. The wind outside rose and fell. I began to think maybe it was over, that what I'd seen on the road had been a nightmare carried into daylight. Then the dogs stopped moving. Their heads turned toward the window, their ears flattened. The first knock came. Soft, almost polite. The second was louder, sharper. The third didn't come from the door. It came from the roof. The dogs started barking wildly, teeth bared as if the ceiling itself had come alive. Her father stood, grabbed a handful of salt and threw it into the air, shouting words I didn't understand. Her mother pressed a finger to my lips, whispering, "Don't breathe." She's searching. Through the ceiling, I heard the faint rustle of feathers dragging across tiles, then something heavy landing by the window. A shadow passed across the curtain. It was tall, thin, and its edges trembled like smoke. The candle flickered violently. For a second, I thought it would go out, and I don't know why, but I knew that if it did, she would come inside. Her father began reciting a prayer I'd never heard before, not in Spanish, not in Latin. The words were rough, old, the kind of language that tastes like stone when spoken. The scratching on the window stopped. And then came the laugh. That same dry, hollow laugh I'd heard on the road. It circled the house, fading, returning like something walking the perimeter. I couldn't tell if it came from far away or just beyond the wall. The sound made my teeth ache, made the air feel thin. Finally, silence. We stayed still for hours, waiting. When the first gray light of dawn crept through the cracks, her father opened the door. The world outside was calm, but in the dust near the threshold lay a long mark, curved and deep, as if something had dragged its talon there before leaving. That morning he told me I should return home soon. "She knows you now," he said, "and the mountain doesn't forget faces." Before I left, my friend pressed something into my hand, a small charm made of bone and thread. "Keep this close when you travel," she said. "If you hear wings, don't look up." I still have it. The thread has turned gray with time, and the bone feels warm when I hold it. Sometimes when the nights are windless and the air grows too still, I think I can hear her laughter again, echoing through the spaces where sound should not travel. And every time I do, I remember those rules. No names, no whistles, no light, no answers after 3 knocks. Because she's still out there, gliding somewhere between earth and sky, searching for someone foolish enough to listen. I was 12 the year the dancer found me. At that age, you still believe in simple boundaries, that daylight means safety, that a door can keep the world outside, that monsters only exist in stories. The night I stopped believing was the night we left the cinema. It had rained earlier, the asphalt still breathing out steam under the streetlights. My mother was driving. We passed by the canal that ran behind the plaza, and I remember thinking how calm it looked. The water slick and black, carrying reflections instead of current. I was watching a parked car, its paint gleaming under the lamps, when something beside it moved. At first, I thought it was a woman stretching. Then I saw her legs. She was doing a split, one leg forward, the other back on the gravel by the roadside. Her clothes were torn, her skin pale, and her head hung to one side as if her neck had forgotten its job. When she turned toward me, her face caught the light. Eyes too wide, lips cracked into a smile that looked sewn on. I screamed. The car swerved. My mother slammed the brakes. I couldn't stop shaking. She asked what I'd seen, but I couldn't speak. All I could think was that the woman's eyes had followed us as we passed, her mouth still moving, though no sound came out. That night, I refused to sleep alone. My mother stayed with me until I drifted off, but the moment the lights went out, I heard it, a faint tapping, rhythmic, coming from the bathroom door. Like someone drumming fingers on wood. Days passed. I tried to forget, but the feeling of being watched didn't fade. I'd catch glimpses in the corner of my vision, a shadow in the mirror, a pale blur by the stairs. At first, I thought it was stress. Then the whispers began. It was a woman's voice, soft, coaxing, familiar. "Do you ever wonder what it feels like?" she would ask. "To fall so far your body forgets the ground." I would cover my ears and hum songs to drown her out, but the voice always found a way in, between breaths, between blinks. My grades dropped. I stopped eating. At night, I felt the weight of someone sitting on my bed. The mattress would sink beside me, the air turning cold and sweet, like the smell of wilted flowers. I'd hide under the blanket, heart hammering, waiting for it to stop. Sometimes it did. Sometimes it didn't. My mother took me to therapists. They said trauma, anxiety, sleep paralysis. They gave me pills that made the nights blur but didn't stop the visits. I'd wake unable to move, eyes fixed on the corner of my room where the darkness was thicker. That's where she stood. The dancer. She was always the same. Short hair clinging to her face, feet bare and dirty, her knees bent in impossible angles as if she were still performing. Her eyes glowed faintly, not with light, but with attention. She would tilt her head, curious, as if studying the way I breathed. And then she would smile, that same stitched smile. Once she spoke. Her voice came from everywhere at once. "You saw me when you shouldn't have." After that, the dreams changed. I wasn't in my room anymore. I was standing beside the canal, the air thick with humidity, the water perfectly still. The dancer stood on the opposite side, her reflection rippling behind her like a separate body. She began to move, her limbs cutting through space in shapes that made no sense, her body folding backward, twisting. The sound of her joints cracking echoed like breaking branches. Then she dropped to the ground into that same split, and I felt pain shoot through my legs as if the movement were mine. I woke screaming. My mother found me with blood under my fingernails. I'd been scratching at my own thighs in my sleep. Weeks later, I stopped hearing the voice but started feeling something else. Sadness, enormous and alien, pressing against my chest. It wasn't mine, I knew that. It felt borrowed, like wearing someone else's grief. It came with images I couldn't explain, a dressing room filled with mirrors, a stage curtain, a single spotlight flickering out. One night, the sadness became unbearable. I felt it crawling inside my ribs, begging for release. I remember standing by the bathroom mirror, hands trembling, the voice whispering again, "It would stop hurting if you join me." That was when the knock came, 3 quick taps on the door. My mother's voice calling my name. I dropped to the floor, sobbing, the spell broken. We left the house for a week after that. I slept at my aunt's place, lights always on. Still, every time I closed my eyes, I saw her sitting in the corner, knees open in that grotesque split, watching, waiting. When we returned home, the air felt lighter, but the damage had been done. I no longer trusted silence. I no longer trusted my own reflection. Then came the final night. I woke from sleep paralysis again, unable to move. The TV was still on, its flicker painting the walls blue. I forced my eyes toward it, thinking maybe the light would break the spell. And there she was, between me and the screen, her body half turned, her face inches from mine. Her breath was cold. She whispered, "Now you know how it feels to fall." I must have passed out. When I woke the next morning, the bathroom mirror was cracked, as if someone had pressed a forehead against it. My mother called for a curandero, an old man from the outskirts who dealt with things medicine couldn't name. He arrived carrying an egg and a bundle of herbs. He circled me, muttering prayers, then broke the egg into a glass of water. The yolk spread out like smoke, twisting into shapes. He frowned. "You're carrying someone else's sorrow," he said. "A woman who died unfinished." He performed Olympia, passing the herbs over my body, the smoke of copal burning my eyes. When he reached my face, something inside me shattered. I began to cry. Deep, guttural sobs that felt like they belonged to someone else. He kept going until the crying stopped. Then he whispered, "She's gone." That night, for the first time in months, I slept without dreams. But sometimes when I walk past mirrors, I still glimpse movement at the edge. The shadow of a woman lowering herself into a split, smiling as if remembering an old dance. The old man's name was Don Eusebio. People said he had once been a priest but had left the church after seeing something in the sacristy that made him go half blind. His remaining eye was the color of smoke, always watery, always watching more than it should. When he came that morning, he said nothing to my mother, only nodded and asked for a glass of water, a candle, and silence. He told me to sit on a wooden chair, feet bare, hands on my knees. The air inside our house felt swollen, too still. When he struck the match, the flame bent toward me as if the room were breathing from my direction. He began with prayers that weren't from any mass I'd ever heard. The words rose and fell like waves, half in Spanish, half in something older. He dipped a branch of ruda into the bowl of salt water, flicked droplets over my head, and said softly, "El agua no limpia, recuerda. Por eso hay que enseñarle a olvidar." Water doesn't cleanse, he said. It remembers. That's why we must teach it to forget. Then he took out an egg and rolled it across my skin. It was cool at first, then warm, as if absorbing heat straight from my bones. He whispered names I didn't recognize, maybe hers, maybe mine. My vision blurred. The scent of burning copal filled my throat. When he cracked the egg into a glass, the yolk exploded upward, spreading cloudy tendrils that twisted like limbs. In the center, a small bubble formed, pale, round, pulsing faintly. Don Eusebio leaned close and muttered, "She was a dancer indeed. Broken legs, broken vows, broken heart." I started crying again, not out of fear but exhaustion. Months of weight slid out through my eyes. The tears fell into the bowl of water he'd placed beneath my chair, and as they touched the surface, the water began to hiss. The scent that rose was metallic sharp, like rain striking hot earth. He placed his hand over my eyes and pressed lightly. "When she looked at you," he said, "she gave you her sorrow. But sorrow isn't evil, Mija. It's hunger. It wants a body to keep dancing in." Then he drew a cross on my forehead with oil. His fingers trembled, his breath shallow. "Now give it back," he whispered. I don't remember much after that. There was a noise like wind inside a cave and then darkness. I woke on the floor, my mother holding my face, both of us soaked in sweat. The candle had burned out. The room smelled faintly of roses and smoke. Don Eusebio sat by the doorway, wiping his hands with a cloth that was no longer white. "She's gone," he said simply. "The sadness will stay a little while, but it will be yours this time." He stood limp toward the door and before leaving turned to my mother. "Keep her away from mirrors until the next moon and never let her near the canal again." After that day, I never heard the voice again. I slept without waking to cold air or whispers. My mother said I smiled in my sleep for the first time in months. The therapist called it recovery. I called it silence. Still, there were traces. A faint smell of ruta that clung to my hair. A feeling every now and then of movement at the edge of vision, like a shadow remembering its steps. Once, while cleaning the bathroom, I found a thin white line drawn on the mirror, curving downward, like the trace of a fingertip. I wiped it off without thinking, but when I looked down, my hand was wet. Over the years, I learned to live with it. People forget, and forgetting is another kind of healing. I grew up, moved away, stopped talking about that winter. Yet sometimes, when the night stretches too long and the music from a nearby party drifts through the windows, I feel that old ache in my legs, a phantom tension in my knees, as if some part of me still remembers the split. They say limpias are half medicine, half theater. Maybe it doesn't matter. Maybe faith itself is the cure, the belief that your pain can be named, that your sadness can be folded into smoke and sent away. But I remember the look on Don Eusebio's face when he told me the water remembers. It wasn't warning, it was certainty. And now, all these years later, I sometimes wonder what water keeps of us. The sweat on our skin, the tears on our cheeks, the baths where we wash away days we'd rather not recall. Where do those memories go? Every October, when the air grows cold and still, I hear the faint sound of something dripping. Just a tap, 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 slow and deliberate, like a dancer marking time before the music starts. That's when I remember all of them. Johnny Oregon on his knees under the moonlight, the woman with the face of an old crone biting the life from his throat. Sylvia and her child, caught between 2 hours that never existed, their clocks forever frozen at 9:32. The traveler in Chihuahua who learned the taste of fear in the dark, who heard wings without wind. And me, the girl who saw the dancer by the canal and carried her sadness like a borrowed heart. We were the same in one way. None of us believed until the night came for us. I suppose that's why I'm telling you this now. Because telling makes the silence listen. Because someone out there is hearing these words in a dark room, with only the sound of their own breath for company. And if you feel that breath falter, if the air around you grows colder, if you hear the faint echo of wings or the soft knock of a fingernail against glass, don't look. Keep the light low. Keep the salt close. And remember, the night is patient. It waits for the telling to end. Now you've heard ours, and somewhere the door has opened again.